Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the 5th Annual Masters of Advanced Studies Climate Science and Policy Symposium. I'm Corey Gabriel, the Executive Director of the Climate Science and Policy MAS program here at Scripps. Definitely a pleasure to be here today, although I wish very genuinely we could all be here together in person, although appreciative of you all letting us virtually into your homes, and we look forward to spending the afternoon with you. Like you, I'm excited to see the presentation of all this excellent work that's been done over the last year. And first and foremost, I'm incredibly proud of this group for achieving what they did, particularly in the context of a pandemic. It's a truly unbelievable time. We're all facing, and we will continue to face, what is, to us, an unprecedented challenge. So during these past months, it's been uncertain and often scary, but this CSP group hunkered down. They committed to doing work that was very detailed, very important, work that addressed the ongoing climate problem. And there's no doubt that it takes a lot of focus and determination to complete a capstone project in such a difficult time. Many of these students had to make significant adjustments in their projects due to COVID. However, they moved forward resiliently and they adapted. They immersed themselves into their projects, which again were in many cases modified, and they threw themselves into learning the tools they had to learn to do things like analyze data. So what we're about to watch today is not only a credit to their focus, but really it reflects their passionate connection to this climate problem that we all care so much about. So I'm really privileged to have the opportunity to share this culmination of what I've been seeing build for the last 10 months. So thank you to the class of 2020 for being adaptive, for being tough, and for all the great work you'll showcase over the next 3.5 hours. But before the presentations today, the really extraordinary times we're in require me to take a step back and briefly reflect on some current world events. Honestly, the last several months of pandemic have been very rough in this country and around the world. And while the light on the horizon above the hills in front of us is slowly getting brighter, we are walking a path through a valley of darkness. And while this long walk will take us to a bright sunrise, the COVID journey is far from over. Our separate struggles and our collective challenge will continue. We've all experienced great sadness with the loss of so many people due to COVID-19 in San Diego, across California, across the United States, really all around the world. Also, very importantly, in the last several weeks, the devastating racism, inequality, and dehumanization that has been so threatening and so obvious, so many, so long, has really come to the forefront of the attention of the entire American public. Entrenched systemic racism is very real and leads to brutal attacks and murders we've seen in Louisville, Kentucky, Brunswick, Georgia, Baltimore, Maryland, Sanford, Florida, Brooklyn, New York, Staten Island, New York, Cleveland, Ohio, Ferguson, Missouri, and so many other places. This brutality is pervasive, it's wrong, and it destroys lives. The damage it causes to families can last generations. It destroys communities, and urgent, immediate, transformative action is needed right now to slow it down to the full extent possible. So even more than usual, we face issues of great importance on multiple fronts, including climate change. And we must work together to preserve our safety and our way of life during both this pandemic and this recession. And while doing this, we must simultaneously elevate human dignity and social justice to its rightful elevated place in this country that where it has so long not been. And, throughout the last several months of tumult, climate change's impacts do continue. And sadly, the negative impacts of climate change and poor air quality do fall disproportionately on populations that have been historically and remain currently subjected to unequal treatment. And climate change's impacts are accelerating. Just in the past several weeks, we've seen significant storms and floods over the middle of the USA. 2 cyclones made landfall in India in the last month or so. The second weaker of the 2 cyclones, really in an unusual time and place for a cyclone landfall. The South Asian monsoon started early. A tropical depression of all things maintained intensity over a desert and flooded Oman, a small country on the Arabian Peninsula, with over a year's worth of rain in a single day. Forecasts for Atlantic hurricane season look pretty bad, and 2020 has on the order of a 60 or 70% chance of being the warmest year we've ever recorded across the planet. But despite all of this troubling context, and I know this has been heavy, we, by acting in our own lives, there are things we can do to address all of these things, to help stop the combat, the spread of disease, to help promote social justice, and to reduce what we emit, and thereby help mitigate climate change. So specific to climate change, we do need more than just that individual action alone. So importantly, by voting and also letting your informed voice be heard, you can choose your leaders, and your voice can shape your leaders' priorities. Above all, remember, choose leaders who can look inward and search for moral courage and actually find it. Because in order for us to take strong action to combat climate change, elected officials in many parts of this country might need to bite the bullet and put their sworn duty to the country they love ahead of their political careers. But at least they'll be judged well by history. Americans have, in general, expressed a policy preference on climate change, and that preference is for strong mitigation policies supported by adaptation measures as necessary when the mitigation isn't enough. The preference is definitely for policies consistent with the 2 degrees above pre-industrial targets set out in the Paris Agreement. And those pro-climate policies are ethical and make good sense economically. And it's, while the federal government has demurred, the states are still committed to many states are still committed to following these policies, and many, if not most, major corporations are continuing to do so. So concluding this, while it's easy to dwell on political gridlock, and while it's easy to lament policy failures that have occurred in the past, we can have control over the future, unlike what we have over the past at this point. So let's focus on the future, but never forget what we learned along the way. And just always remember that as a country, we have an excellent track record when there's an existential threat to our way of life. World War II being the best example. We have so many liberties and an amazing way of life to protect. So it seems like the hearts and minds of the majority of people are finally on board in terms of climate, in terms of social justice, and in terms of doing our part to fight the spread of COVID-19. There's a lot to do right now, so let's get to work and focus on the area where we personally can affect change, and that's climate. Before I introduce our first speaker, I want to let everyone know today that the program is broken down into 4 thematic clusters. Please see the program for those. We're going to start with communication and engagement. It's definitely been a long battle to connect the public with good climate science. However, we're bringing forward to the public finally the tools to make informed decisions about whether climate change is real based on facts that we put in front of them. We've won a lot of minds with these facts, and people's hearts tend to follow, but not nearly everyone in this country is on board yet. And even if Americans are all on board with the climate and agree climate change is real, that alone is not enough. You have to understand the impacts of the actions you can take and the impacts of the actions your employers and your government can take to address climate change.